Verse 14, the scripture says, "Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." I want to concentrate mainly on verse 15, but there's at least one phrase in verse 14 that's somewhat important in understanding verse 15, and that's this idea that Jesus is one who has passed through the heavens, that he is the Son of God. And this is not a Son of God, the generic term for anyone who is born through the blood of Christ, but this is the Son of God. The peculiar Son of God, the only begotten God is how he's called in one place. Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus has been in the heavenly places. Jesus is God himself. But it says, despite that fact, we don't have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Why is he able to sympathize with our weaknesses? Because he's lived it. Because he came in the flesh and he lived as a man and he experienced these things. Listen to what it says, "But one who in every respect has been tempted as we are." Now, there's a big caveat at the end of it, "yet without sin." He lived life perfectly. He kept the law perfectly. But he still experienced everything about life that humans experience. And because of that, he is able to sympathize with us. Why is that important, and what does that have to do with our discussion about the Golden Rule? Okay, because and we're going to go there in just a second, that Jesus lived the Golden Rule while he lived on this earth. He knows how to live it out. He also understands that struggle. Part of being able to live the Golden Rule is to have that ability to sympathize or empathize with the people that you're dealing with. And what this says is that God positioned himself to be able to do unto us rightly by sending his Son into the world, so that he was able to sympathize because he has in every respect been tempted as we are. There isn't an aspect of living that God doesn't fully understand. Not academically understand, but actually understand because of what? Because he experienced it. And that's very important. That is part of what allows him to, or part of what I guess he'll do, I'm going to say it this way, in preparing himself to have empathy toward his creation. In Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8, we're actually told to have the same attitude or have the same mindset that Jesus had as he lived. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. That means held on to. But emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And so we're supposed to have that kind of mindset. Now that becomes important because all of what Jesus did in coming to the earth, in what way did it serve him any benefit? You ever thought about that? Any benefit at all to God? Did God gain something? There's a convoluted way that you can suggest that maybe he gained something. He loved his creation. And he gained the ability to once again have communion with them, something that we had messed up. But in fact, that's not his loss as much as it is ours. And in fact, everything that Jesus did in coming to this earth, in taking on the form of a servant, in living as a man, being tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin, so that he might give his life on the cross in obedience to God, wasn't to make something better for him. It was to do what? To serve us. Which is the way and the sense in which Jesus lived out the golden rule in his life. Turn with me to Mark chapter 10 and verse 45. We're going to see it expressed not in direct word for word, but you can't say that he lived the golden rule any more directly than these words do. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus was not born into this world. God did not come and dwell among men to be served. Now, was it appropriate for Jesus to accept worship? Yes, and he did at times. But did he demand it? Did he show forth his glory to everyone and demand that they bow down and acknowledge him? No. Did he have a right as God to do that? Sure, and in fact, there's a day coming where that's exactly what's going to happen, where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. But while he was on the earth, he didn't do that. It was okay for him to accept worship because he was God, but he didn't come here to be served. And he didn't come here asking people, do this for me and do that for me, and I want this and I need... What did he do? He lived his life in service to others. He came not to be served, but to serve. Primarily by offering up his life as a ransom for many. And so you can't possibly do unto others as you would have them do unto you any more than that. To spend every moment of your life to do those things which are needed by others, all the way to the point that you even offer that life itself in service. And so everything that he did was in accordance with this principle. Thus, what people should do if they find themselves in a position of abundance, or if they find themselves in a position of honor, or if they find themselves with an office of trust, or if they find themselves in a position that holds some authority, becomes really, really clear. When you look at the way Jesus lived life as a man, and you consider what he taught, particularly that we've been talking about, this golden rule, what should I do if I have abundance? Well, share what I have in abundance with those who lack. What all would be included in that? It's okay, y'all can talk. I mean, the obvious thing is money, clothes, food. What are some of the non-obvious things that might fall underneath that category? Something that someone may possess in abundance that other people lack. And I'll even say this, they may not even realize they're lacking it. Knowledge, very good. When you possess knowledge in abundance, when you know things that other people don't know, how easy is it to share with them the knowledge of God? Freely you receive, so what? Freely give. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. To whom? To the people who already know it? No. Baptizing them that believe. So you go preach it to the unbelievers, and then the ones who accept it and believe, you help them do what? You help them obey it. That's what that exhortation is to do. You share what you have, anything that you have in abundance. Where other people are around you that they lack it, if they need it, you share it. That's how you live this out. Do nothing you're not authorized to do. That's how you live this out. You do nothing that you're not authorized to do. Always understanding that your authority doesn't arise inherently from yourself. There is not anything that we have any authority in that arises inherently from within ourselves. As parents, where do we get our authority? From God. If we're husbands, what little authority rests in that position, where does it come from? From God. If we are ministers of the state, where does the state get its authority from? From God. If we're human beings, we have authority over the rest of creation, right? Go all the way back to creation, and remember, he said he made man and then gave man dominion over the other things that were created. I have some authority to exercise with regard to that, but it doesn't arrive from within myself. It derives from God. And so we have to keep that in mind. And therefore, I can't decide what to do with my authority. I have to do with my authority what the one who gave it to me to do. Nothing more, nothing less. Yes, sir. I think you're absolutely right. In connection with that, let's go to 1 Corinthians 8 for a second. For the benefit of those that are watching online and didn't hear it, he kind of backed up to the first point, talking about knowledge. If I have knowledge and sharing knowledge and all that kind of stuff, sometimes people can abuse knowledge, not use it properly. Now concerning, that's not the one I want. Yeah, it is. Now, concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge does what? Puffs up. What's that mean? Okay, it makes you arrogant. Makes you think that you're bigger than you really are. That you're more important than you really are. But he contrasts that and says what? But love does something different than that. Love does what? It builds up. And so yes, knowledge can be abused and used in such a way that it's destructive to others. But if we live by the golden rule, how do we use our knowledge? In love. Yep. Yes, sir.
Half of what Jesus talked about was dealing with this subject. And when he said...
Well, all of what Jesus talked about was dealing with this subject. All right, go ahead. Yep.
The Pharisees, the majority of the Gospels was dealing with the religious leaders. And these are the people he said sat in Moses' seat. So they had the knowledge, they had the authority, they had all the credentials, but they wasn't practicing the golden rule with it. And he said he's making these converts, the people that was converting not into righteousness, but into twice as much of, what they were. And as John was saying also, that they was using that knowledge to edify themselves and not the one who gave it to them.
Exactly. That's a very good observation. Using it to edify themselves and not the one who gave it to them, which was, where does all knowledge come from? God. So they weren't using it to honor God. They were using it to honor themselves. And they also weren't using it to edify others and share what they had with others. They used the knowledge to do what? Look how great we are. That's not practicing the golden rule. And keep in mind where this all started. We actually started way back in Leviticus, chapter 19, I think, where he rehearsed essentially the exact same thing that Jesus taught, which was you have to love God and you have to love your neighbors yourself. And in that context, he explains to these folks, by the way, loving your neighbor goes beyond loving your countrymen. It also means loving the stranger whom you don't know. So it all goes back to love, and it's about using the things that you are given in a way that demonstrates your love for God and your love for your fellow man. And by the way, how do you demonstrate your love for God? If you love me, you will keep my commandments. It's really simple. By listening and doing what he asks you to do. That's how you demonstrate your love for God. Yeah, I'm not still praying. You'll be happy to know in just a second, if you can read them, everything we talk about tonight in the next week or two is probably up on that screen. So, third thing, don't abuse your position. Particularly position of authority for selfish or personal gain. That's not why we're given authority. We're there to serve, not to be served. And that right there is extremely important. Now, where did I draw this little short list from? Well, turn with me to Luke chapter 3, verses 10 through 14, and we're going to see exactly where I drew this little list from. Luke 10, I said 10. Luke 3, verse 10. Luke 3, verse 10. The crowds asked him. So Jesus has been teaching here. The crowds asked him, "What then shall we do?" And he answered them, "Whoever has 2 tunics, share with him who has none, and whoever has food is to do likewise." Point number 1, share what you have in abundance with those who lack it. That's how you live the golden rule. That's how you show your love for God and your love for your fellow man. Tax collectors also came to be baptized and said to him, "Teacher, what shall we do?" And he said to them, "Collect no more than you are authorized to do. Do nothing you are not authorized to do." That's how you live the golden rule. What do I need to do, Lord? Tax collector asked Jesus, and the tax collector is told, you function within the authority that you have and nothing else. Don't abuse your position of authority. And soldiers also asked him, "And we, what shall we do?" And he said to them, "Do not extort money from anyone by threats or by false accusation, and be content with your wages." Do not abuse your position for selfish or personal gain.
By the way, that was John, not Jesus.
Oh, thank you. You're right. This is very important for us to grasp and understand. That all that has ever been taught, every command that's ever been given, that emanates from God has hung on those two principles. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And that means that wherever we find ourselves in life, that's what has to govern how we behave. If we find ourselves with an abundance, we listen to God and we share. If we find ourselves with authority, then we limit our actions to what we're authorized to do and no more. If we find ourselves in a position of power, then we use it to serve other people, not to serve ourselves. It's very important. Let's talk about applying the golden rule in some various ways. Look with me at Matthew chapter 8. We're going to look at verses 5 through 12. And this one may not be super apparent at the outset, but I think we'll be able to see what's understood here and what develops in this conversation from it. Matthew 8, starting in verse 5. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly." And he said to him, "I'll come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it." I'm going to read the beginning of verse 9 again, because I think sometimes we read past the first phrase, "I too am a man under authority," meaning what? He has people over him. He understands what it means to have people with authority over him telling him what to do. I'm a man under authority with soldiers under me. So not only did he have authority to exercise over others, but he had others who exercised authority over him, and that taught him something. I say to one, go, and he goes, to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, "Truly, I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such great faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." What is about this story that reflects an appreciation and understanding for the things that we're talking about when we talk about loving God and loving our neighbor, or following the golden rule, doing to others as you would have them do unto you? There's actually several things that appear. For instance, Jesus says, "I'll go to your house." And he says what? No, you don't need to do that. But he doesn't just say you don't need to do that. He says what? I'm not worthy. He understands his place. He understands God's place. He understands that. By the way, I'll just add something real quick here. It just popped into my head. He's not even asking for himself, is he? He's asking for someone who is under his authority. He is using his ability to petition the Lord, not for something that he wants or needs, but for the need of a servant. Way too many people in the world would look at that servant and say, it's just a servant. But he understands what? That he doesn't have the position that he has for himself. He has it to do what? To serve others. He understands authority. And so, because he understands authority, he doesn't abuse his authority. And he uses his authority for the purposes of which he gave it. He doesn't use his authority over the servant to serve himself. He uses his authority over the servant to provide what he can for them.
You see that same example you're talking about there in your prayers. You pray for others. You've done the same thing.
I agree.
Mike, can I add
Yep.
something?
You add anything you want.
Now, this is some speculation, but if you look at the Roman centurion servant, I think we bypass this often. Apparently, the servant knew who Jesus was as well. And I'm going to explain what I'm saying. If you know the history of Rome, their servants were Israelites or Jewish.
Some of them, yeah, in Jerusalem.
Yes. We talk about a centurion Gentile who knew who Jesus and calls him Lord. He was influenced by someone to consider that. And now that Jesus recognizes that his faith is greater than all in Israel, someone influenced this man. Someone showed the centurion the golden rule is what I'm trying to get at.
Someone did. I agree. I agree with you completely.
Yes.
There is an example that's very clear cut to what you're saying. It predates this one a whole lot, and that's Naaman the leper, who did have a Hebrew girl that was his servant, who did learn about the prophet of God from his servant, who, by the way, to begin with, didn't handle things too well, but finally came around. In this case, I think it's clear there was something about his service in watching these people and hearing what they had to say that did affect him. He understood that Jesus had authority. That's why he came to him. That's why he called him Lord. I don't think he called him Lord the way that we think of him when we call him Lord. I think he called him Lord as a title of honor or respect, as someone who had power and authority, which is quite a lot coming from a Roman to a non-Roman. But he says, Lord, my servant's paralyzed at home and suffering terribly. Why did he bring that to Jesus? See, he knew something about Jesus' ability to heal and his willingness to heal, or he wouldn't have brought it to Jesus. And Jesus responds by saying, okay, I'll come and heal him. I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. All you have to do is say the word. Now, I mentioned this, I think, in the Sunday night sermon. The one whose child needed to be healed, and he went to Jesus, and Jesus said, if you believe. The key in that exchange is he goes to Jesus, but then he says, if you can help. Do you notice that this centurion has no doubt at all? All you have to do is say the word, and I know my servant's going to be healed. You don't have to go there. You don't have to travel there. You don't have to be there. You don't have to lay your hands. All you have to do is say it, because I understand authority. And that understanding caused him to appreciate God and appreciate God's creation and appreciate God's ability and appreciate God's rightness and accept his own place. And yeah, he's an impressive character to me because he used his position and place not in the betterment of himself, but in the betterment of the people around him. I think he probably made a really good commander. Yes, sir. Yeah, not a doubt in his mind.
He didn't have a doubt. He had the thing that Jesus stressed a lot when he had faith.
Right. And what's interesting about the deal is when Jesus responds, okay, I'll come do it, he's like, no, I'm not worthy to have you in my house. How big a deal is that for a Roman to say to a Jew? What did the Romans generally think about themselves? Same thing that Americans think about ourselves. All the other people out there in the world, they're good folks, but we're Americans.
It was beyond that. They was the oppressors of the Israelites. They were the authority that was keeping them down to the
Yep.
point to where they had to pay taxes and they had to do everything to the Romans. And
Now-
the Romans wasn't just good people in their mind. These were the soldiers who was marching down the streets, keeping the Jews in line. So they was not friends and allies. That's why they had all the rebellions. And that's why people thought Jesus was the leader of the rebellion, because these people
Yep.
was oppressive.
Problems had arisen. Problems had arisen. The early days, the Romans actually were not horrible people to take over, but it got worse and worse and worse as they got more and more arrogant, by the way. Yes, sir.
There's something about this story that when I think about it, I just wonder why would you think that Jesus mourned when he heard
because this man had such great faith. And the Israelites who had the Word of God, they lacked it.
We're talking about God Almighty.
Yeah, we are. Yes, he did. And it's a significant statement. Tell you what, try to live your life so that you make God marvel at you. There's a challenge for you. Try to be the kind of person that makes God look down and say, wow. Now that's what I'm talking about. That's the way Job lived, by the way. That's the way Noah lived. That's the way Enoch lived. And that's a challenge for us. And by the way, to bring this full circle back to what we're talking about, one of the big ways that we're going to be able to accomplish that is if we do what? If we live our life through the golden rule. We don't call it the golden rule for nothing. Chapter 20, Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 28. The mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something, and he said to her, "What do you want?" And she said, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." And Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm also to drink?" And they said to him, "We are able." By the way, that verse right there tells you that Mama's not acting alone. The sons are there too, because they're the ones that answer that question. Yeah, we can do that. He said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant. It's for those whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. What does indignant mean? Yeah, they were mad. But Jesus called to them and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." See, here we have a case where two of his disciples just didn't quite get it yet. And they liked this idea of having positions of honor and authority, being in charge, and they knew that he was going to be leaving soon. And so the kingdom's going to be set up. We want to be, we know we can't be the king. That's going to be you. We want to be your right hand and your left hand man. And he said, that's not the way this kingdom works. The Gentiles, they use their authority that way. Their great ones exercise authority over them, but that's not how my kingdom works. In my kingdom, the one who would be great has to be what? I skipped one who would be first. I went all the way to the one who would be great because of the language that he uses there is even more strong. Not a servant, but a slave. What does that mean? Listen, when you're a slave, you are obligated to serve. It's not a choice. It's not for an exchange that you make an agreement with. You don't have a choice in the world. You just have to serve. You want to be great in my kingdom, then you're a servant of all. Yes, ma'am.
And he gave them an example of that.
Yeah, he did. And here was the creator of the universe on his knees, washing the dirty feet of 12 stinky men. You ever thought about that? I don't know what it was like to live Jesus' life. I know that as he interacted with people, it frustrated him when they didn't know something that they should have known, or they didn't understand something that they should have understood, or they didn't do things that he knew they knew and understood. That frustrated him. And it's a big enough deal for the teacher to be the one who's washing the disciples' feet. But when you really think about it and what we know, we're not talking about just a human teacher. We're talking about what? Eternal God, creator of all things. And then he turns around and says, hey, if I wash your feet, then you what? You can serve your fellows too. If I can serve you, then you can serve one another. And what's most important here in this, and he does it right here in this context in Matthew 20, after he says, whoever would be first among you must be your slave, he says, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. In other words, he said, look, I'm not asking you to do something that what? I myself am not doing. Now think about that for a moment and realize that every single commandment that God has ever given man, he himself has been willing to submit himself to. And we're going to say, that's too much, or I can't do it, or I don't think I should have to do it, or my favorite, that's not fair. How fair was it for Jesus to be abused and mocked and beaten and crucified? How fair was that? Let's look at Ephesians 5 for a moment. Ephesians 5, we're going to start reading in verse 25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. That last statement, do you hear anything interesting about that? Any parallel to that? Remember the language of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Put yourself in their place and treat them the way that you would want to be treated. Is that not exactly what he says to husbands? Husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. You love your wife the way that you love yourself. He who loves his wife does love himself. You know what that means, right? That last statement, he who loves his wife loves himself. You know what that means? That if you don't love your wife, then you don't really love yourself. Not truly. You may be selfish. You may seek to gratify yourself. But you don't really love yourself. Because if we love ourselves, what would we do? Well, in this context, very clearly, we would love our wives. But beyond that, if we love ourselves, what do we do generally? We do what's in our own best interest. Which is what? Live righteously and godly. Which involves us doing what? Humbling ourselves. Not making more of ourselves than we ought to make. Not abusing the authority that's given to us. Not being selfish. Not being selfishly ambitious. By the way, not anything wrong with being ambitious. There's something wrong with being selfishly ambitious, though. When you're ambitious only to serve yourself, only to see what you can get out of it. I hate that bell. I'm going to stop. Appreciate everybody's presence and those that are watching online. Lord wills, we'll be back